An iconic American company, a city that built its entire identity around it, and in just a matter of weeks, $750 million begins to disappear, not with a headline, not with a shutdown, but quietly, almost invisibly, right beneath the surface. Starbucks is not leaving Seattle. The headquarters is still there. The logo is still on every corner. The story looks the same, but the money is moving. The jobs are shifting. The growth is going somewhere else. And that changes everything. Because this is not a business decision in the way most people think. This is not about coffee, or branding, or expansion. This is what happens when capital reacts to a system that no longer works in its favor. Money does not argue. It does not protest. It does not negotiate. It moves, fast, quietly, and at scale. And when it starts moving, the consequences show up years later, when it is already too late to reverse. So the real question is not why Starbucks is expanding. The real question is, what changed in the system that made $750 million decide to leave without anyone noticing? And if it happened here, where does it happen next? Seattle was once one of the most powerful business ecosystems in the United States. Not by accident, but by design. In 2014, it ranked among the top 6 states for business tax, climate, and that ranking was not just a number. It was a signal to capital, to talent, and to companies around the world. This is where growth happens. The system was simple and highly efficient. Talent moved into the city. Companies formed and scaled. Profits expanded. Taxes were collected. And that revenue fueled more growth, creating a self-reinforcing loop that attracted even more capital. Starbucks grew inside this system. Amazon scaled globally from it. Microsoft dominated entire industries because of it. This was not luck. This was infrastructure, economic infrastructure built to optimize for capital efficiency and long-term expansion. And when a system like that works, it becomes invisible. People stop questioning it because the results speak for themselves. Jobs increase, wages rise, the city expands, and success feels permanent. But systems do not fail all at once. They shift slowly, quietly, often unnoticed, until the outcomes begin to change. And when the outcomes change, it is already a reflection of something deeper breaking underneath. Because capital does not wait for headlines. It reacts to incentives, to friction, to signals that most people never see. Which leads to the real question. If this system was once so effective, what changed inside it that made capital start looking for a way out? At first, nothing looked broken. The system was still producing growth. Companies were still operating, and the surface told a stable story. But underneath, the structure began to shift. Slowly and quietly, taxes started to change. Not all at once, but in layers. First came the capital gains tax, targeting investment income. Then came the discussion of broader income taxation, eventually leading to a 9.9% tax on high earners. Each policy on its own seemed manageable, even reasonable, but together they changed the direction of the system. Because cost does not need to spike overnight to trigger a reaction. It only needs to trend upward in a predictable way. And that is exactly what capital tracks, not just current cost, but future trajectory. At the same time, something else began to change. The relationship between politics and business started to shift. It was no longer alignment. It became tension. Public pressure increased, rhetoric hardened, signals became mixed. And for companies operating at scale, signals matter as much as numbers because they shape long-term risk. And this is where most people misunderstand what happens next. Companies do not react to a single tax bill. They react to the direction of the entire system. They ask a simple question. Where is this going over the next 10 years? Not just what does it cost today? And once that direction starts pointing away from efficiency, capital begins to prepare, quietly, gradually, positioning itself for movement. Which raises the critical question. At what point does preparation turn into action? And when does the system cross the line where staying becomes more expensive than leaving? Now the numbers begin to expose what the headlines hide. $12,000 saved per employee every single year. That is not a small efficiency. That is a structural advantage. Multiply that across 2,000 jobs, and the result is $24 million in annual savings. Not once, not temporarily, but every year going forward. And when you extend that over a 20-year horizon, the total reaches $750 million, quietly shifting away from Washington, not through layoffs or collapse, but through relocation and strategic expansion. This is how capital moves in the real world, not with noise, but with precision. And while that money is leaving, another signal appears. The state's business tax climate ranking falls from number 6 to number 45. A drop that does not happen randomly. It reflects a decade of compounding policy changes that gradually reduce competitiveness. And when you combine these two forces, rising cost and falling attractiveness, the outcome becomes predictable. Capital does not stay where it is penalized. It moves to where it is rewarded, and that is the critical shift most people miss. This is not just a company moving jobs from one state to another. This is capital reallocating itself across systems, searching for efficiency, searching for stability, searching for growth. And once that process begins, it rarely reverses, which leads to the uncomfortable question that few are asking. If a company as iconic and rooted as Starbucks is already shifting its growth elsewhere, who is next to follow the same path? Tennessee did not reinvent anything. It did not launch a complex incentive program. It did not negotiate behind closed doors. It simply built a system that removes friction, no state income tax, lower operating costs, predictable regulation, and most importantly, consistency over time. And that combination creates something far more powerful than any short-term incentive. It creates trust, because for companies making billion-dollar decisions, stability is more valuable than temporary benefits. And this is where the dynamic shifts completely. Tennessee is not actively chasing companies like Starbucks. It does not need to. The system itself does the work. It sends a clear signal to capital. This is a place where your cost will stay low, your risk will stay controlled, and your growth will not be penalized. And when that signal is strong enough, companies respond without being asked. They move operations, they shift hiring, they redirect investment. Not because of marketing, but because of math. And this is the part most people underestimate. This is not a competition between cities trying to look more attractive. This is a structural competition between two different economic models, one that layers cost over time, and one that removes it, one that introduces uncertainty, and one that minimizes it. And once that competition begins, it does not stay isolated to one company or one state. It spreads, because capital always searches for the most efficient system available, which raises a much bigger question. Is this just a single decision by Starbucks, or is this the early signal of a much larger shift already underway across the entire country? Starbucks is not leaving Seattle, and that is exactly why most people misunderstand what is happening. The headquarters is still there, the brand is still tied to the city, the image has not changed, but none of that reflects where the future is being built. Because in today's economy, headquarters are symbols. They represent the past, while growth represents the future. And those two things no longer have to exist in the same place. We have already seen this pattern before. JP Morgan kept its headquarters in New York, but quietly expanded thousands of jobs into Texas, shifting its operational center of gravity without ever announcing a departure. And that is how modern economic migration works. It is not dramatic. It is not sudden. It is gradual, calculated, and almost invisible until the shift is complete. Because companies are no longer tied to a single location, they distribute functions based on efficiency, cost, and long-term scalability, which means the real question is no longer where a company is headquartered. The real question is where it is investing its next dollar, where it is hiring its next employee, where it is building its next system. And once that movement begins, it compounds over time, pulling talent, infrastructure, and opportunity with it, leaving behind a shell that still looks intact on the surface, which leads to the uncomfortable reality most cities are not prepared to face. If growth is happening somewhere else, if the next generation of jobs is being created elsewhere, then what remains in the original city, beyond legacy, beyond history, beyond the illusion of stability? High-tax states are starting to feel the pressure, not all at once, but in a steady and compounding way. Talent begins to leave first, following opportunity and lower cost of living. Then capital follows, searching for higher returns and fewer constraints. And eventually, companies adjust their strategy, shifting hiring, investment, and expansion into more efficient regions. At the same time, low-tax states are not just attracting jobs. They're building entire ecosystems, new supply chains, new infrastructure, new centers of economic gravity that did not exist a decade ago. And once that foundation is in place, the shift accelerates, because growth feeds growth, while decline feeds decline. This is where the concept of a death spiral becomes real. Higher taxes push businesses out. Fewer businesses reduce the tax base, and that forces even higher taxes on those who remain, creating a cycle that becomes harder to reverse with each step. And the most important insight is simple. Money is not loyal to history. It does not care about legacy. It moves toward efficiency, toward stability, toward systems that reward growth instead of punishing it. Which leads to the final question. Is your state building a system that attracts capital, or slowly creating the conditions that push it away?